Mediabyte Podcast Network.
Jason, Mother is talking to you.
I want to play a game.
Don't fall asleep.
Just been informed that zombies have entered the building.
You opened it. We came.
The unburied dead are coming back to life.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Slash It Podcast. And, before we get started, I wanted to say thank you for all that you guys do listening to all of the podcasts that we do. Diary of Indie Filmmaker, Exploring Cinema, and the Mediabyte Podcast, and of course the podcast that you're actively listening to right now. All of that means very, very much to me, and I cannot say how much every single person who really listens to these things really means something to me. There is something very, 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 very special to me about being able to entertain people. So to start off this episode, I want to read a quote from Stan Lee that has been plastered on my wall, the same picture, since he died back in 2018. And this is what it says. I've had this on my wall for now, at this point, 7 years. It was really important to me when I read this for the first time, because I realized that this is what I always wanted to do with my life, and I never wanted to do anything differently. I used to be embarrassed because I was just a comic book writer, while other people were building bridges or going on to medical careers. And then I began to realize, entertainment is one of the most important things in people's lives. Without it, they might go off the deep end. I feel that if you're able to entertain people, you're doing a good thing. So I've always kept that very, very close to my heart, since that moment, since I read it for the first time, because it's always meant the world to me, just everything about it, everything that that means. I've always wanted to entertain people in any facet possible, so every person who listens to this, every person who clicks on it for 10 seconds, listens up to this and goes, oh, I don't like this very much, I still really deeply appreciate that, because I've always wanted to do this with every single ounce and fiber of my being. So I really appreciate it, and every moment you spend watching or listening to anything I create, the movies I make, the podcasts, the videos, whatever, it means a lot to me, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you. So with that, we will get into what you're expecting from the Slash It Podcast, and let's get on with it, shall we? The fourth Final Destination film, titled Final Destination, released in August of 2009, August 28th specifically, with a budget of $40 million, it made $187.4 million back. This is a profit of $147.4 million, which is more than what Final Destination 3 made in total, not including subtracting the budget from the total box office for Final Destination 3. So that's just what they made in total. So what Final Destination 3 in total made is what Final Destination 4 made in profit. So the film was released about 3 years after Final Destination 3, keeping up with the standards set so far by Final Destination 2 and 3 being 3 years apart from each other. This, which is really funny, the Final Destination film, the fourth Final Destination, titled Final Destination, is filmed in 3D and not Final Destination 3, which, Final Destination 3D tagline that most films would have done. The theatrical runtime of this film is only 82 minutes, which at this point is the shortest film in the entire franchise of all four movies at this point. That is the shortest runtime, which says something very, very interesting about either the editing or the script or something, because it's very, 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 very short for a film that's only an hour and 22 minutes long. That's not including credits or openings or anything like that. That is just the actual runtime. So credits in that at least 2 minutes probably. So the film is probably only 80 minutes, maybe less. The credits might be longer. It might be 5 minutes. So the whole movie might be only like 76 minutes, 77 minutes maybe at the most, which is not very good for a film because it needs to be longer than that. But we'll get into that, of why I think the film is that short, because it's kind of, to me, it's kind of obvious why the film is that short, and you'll know what I'm talking about in a minute. David Ellis, who directed the second franchise is back as the director for this one. The script was written by Eric Bress, who wrote the second film as well. So James Wong, who directed the first and third film, was supposed to come back originally to direct this one, but dropped out. And I'm sure he was very, very thankful that he did, because, spoiler alert, I do not like very much about this film. I know I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but I want to talk about this now, because about why I think the film didn't work, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But we gotta go through some stuff. But before we get there, the titling this film Final Destination was the worst case for this film. As someone who got into these films way later, Final Destination being Final Destination for years, I thought Final Destination was like a alternate version of The Final Destination, like the original one. Like if you go on Max right now, it's The Final Destination with Devon Sawa and all that. Like that's the main cover, and then 2 and 3 are their own covers, and then 4th just says Final Destination with a skull. I thought that was just like an alternative poster. I never realized that that was like an entire different film for years, until I got it on Blu-ray and I watched them all that way for the first time, because I saw that picture all over the internet everywhere for years, and I thought that for the Final Destination, the 4th film, was a alternate version of the first film. I never realized that there was a 4th film called Final Destination until I watched it in like all at once, because I knew a lot about the sequels, but I never really watched them until I kind of just watched all of them back to back, as you've heard in previous episodes. So I had no idea that the Final Destination, the 4th one, was Final Destination, not the Final Destination from the 90s or early 2000s, 2000, 99, 2000. I can't remember right now, but it's just pretty crazy, and I think that's probably a big issue with why this film wasn't as good as it could have been. I bet you this film would have made a lot more money if they had not called it Final Destination and just called it something more interesting than that. So, I don't really know how to explain. I think there's something really wrong with the remaking or rebooting kind of a film like this, with the tagline of just the original film without the. Like, what am I thinking of? Oh, like the new, it's called Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the film that's on Netflix. It's just called Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You just took out the, and I also don't like that movie. So, those are 2 reasons why I think these movies are not good, is because the Final Destination and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, taking out the to make a sequel is just kind of ridiculous. I mean, come up with a creative name that's not just removing the from the original film, because I think, like, I don't know what you would call this film, but even just call it Final Destination 4. I don't know, but I think with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you kind of run into a problem, because I don't know what you would call it. I don't know what you would call the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, and I guess that's why, or the old one, I guess, at this point, and I guess that's why people were so upset by it, but I don't know. I guess that's a whole different conversation, and when eventually we go through the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, which will be fun and crazy to go through at some point, I think there's some major issues with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, but I actually think that would be kind of fun. That's not a hint or a drop at where we're going next with any of these films, but I think it'll be fun to see where we go and what happens with it, because the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise is one of the craziest franchises I've ever watched, personally. Any of the sequels I've ever watched make no sense, and I cannot explain why they're sequels to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but how did we get to Texas Chainsaw Massacre? I don't know. So we're going to ignore that, and we're going to go back to Final Destination, released in 2009. So August 28th, 2009 is when this film released, and we are going to be jumping into the cast of the film. Personally, not talking about the main characters, a lot of the side characters in this film are one of my least favorite sets of characters. Not because of like characters as in the actors or anything. All the actors are fine. All of like the acting is fine. Everybody, it's the way the characters are written that really bothers me a lot about this film in particular. So let's look at our first cast member that I wrote down here, Bobby Campo as Nick O'Bannon. So please, if I mispronounce a name, I have no disrespect, nothing like that. I'm just not great at pronouncing names sometimes. But so Bobby plays the main character in this film, not the worst main character in the franchise, I think. Before this, he was in a direct-to-video spin-off of Legally Blonde called Legally Blondes. He was also in a bunch of TV shows like Law & Order and CSI Miami. In the horror world outside of Final Destination, the main role that he plays is Seth Branson in the Scream TV show. I think he does a fine job in this movie. Sadly, I don't think he's done much since this movie came out. Not much in the film world. If he's done more stuff outside of the film world, I don't know. But in the film world, he hasn't done much other than some of those TV shows and stuff like that. Like Law & Order and CSI came out after this film. But I think he does a fine job. It's just he's not like, he's not Devon Sawa. And he's not someone who can... The character itself, not Bobby Campo. Like, he's fine. But I think there's something wrong with the character, the way the character is, because I don't feel like he holds up weight to the way the film handles his character. It's not very good, in my opinion. I think his character needed to be fleshed out a little bit more, and his motivations for why things are going on and why he does certain things or why he cares so much about certain things need to be explained better. But I think it's fine. And with that, we're going to move on to the next character, kind of like the secondary main character, if you'd like to call it that. Chantal Van Zanten, sorry if I mispronounced that, is Lori Milligan. Chantal Van Zanten is in CW's The Flash, where she plays Patty Spivot in the second season for 10 episodes. She does a fine job as the secondary main character that a lot of the Final Destination films have for some reason. I honestly think that she does a great job in The Flash. She does a great job. I think she does a fine job in this. I almost wish that she was the main character and they had kind of swapped stories, because I think her job is much more important. The way that her character is a lot more important, I almost feel, to the overall story of Final Destination 4 than Nick O'Bannon, because Nick O'Bannon's story in this film is not great, and we'll get to the plot in a minute. But she does a fine job. Basically, that's all. She's kind of just the Clear Rivers version of, and of this film. And so that's kind of how I feel about that. She's kind of the very plug-and-play versions of all the characters on all the films, except I think the only time where I don't feel that way is with Final Destination 3. I feel like they got far enough away from the very stereotypes of plug and play. This is the Devon Sawa, this is the Clear Rivers character, this is the side characters. All right, now go. They got away from that in the third one, and then they kind of went back to that a lot in this one. Most of the characters are just plug and play versions of the other characters from previous films. It's not anybody's fault. It's kind of just how a lot of horror sequels go. You gotta ride a line between remembering. So I think that's something people don't think enough about when they're talking about horror sequels in general, but horror movie sequels especially. There's such a fine line that you have to draw between keeping things separate enough from the first film or like the second sequel or the film that came right before you in your franchise, and also bringing something creatively different enough that warrants your existence outside of just being like another version of the film that other people have already liked. And not enough people really fully pay attention to that and give enough grace when it comes to that kind of thing. Like Halloween 2018, for example. Halloween 2018 plays itself safe, but also introduces a lot of stuff that is not directly from the first Halloween film, right? It plays it safe in certain aspects, but it's also really fun and it's good, and moments of it I find very scary. I have faults with movies like that one, and I have faults with other movies as well, but I think that movie is worth watching because you get to see a different version of Halloween, right? Like the first Halloween, you get to see another. It feels like the same world, and I think that's really important, that you can't get away with if you completely ignore the events or the way the first story is told. Does not work. So why we got on another tangent talking about Halloween, I don't know, but it kind of ties into this, right? Like sequels like this one, where it's just kind of like, okay, we're doing the same thing again, here we go, and we're trying to get this movie running and out the door. It doesn't work unless you give a reason for your existence, that it proceeds itself outside of just, I need to make money for this franchise and now I'm going to make money for the franchise. If you can figure out how to get yourself out of that place, then you got it. But otherwise, it doesn't work the way people think it does, where you can just write down a quick franchise idea, write down a next sequel, and then make it. Come up with something creative that fits into the box that you've created, and then also does a big jolt outside of that. Keeps it familiar, but jolts out of it. Not to spoil our discussion about the 5th Final Destination film. But Final Destination 6, Final Destination Bloodlines is what we're talking about. So not Final Destination 5, because I forget that Final Destination, the remake, is in this. I forget that there's another remake called Final Destination. That literally always confuses me, that the 5th Final Destination film is even there. I've never understood that at all. But yeah, we're not even jumping into that right now. That'll be for the next Final Destination film franchise episode. But Final Destination Bloodlines does a great job at jolting outside of its own box that was set for it by the previous films. Even Final Destination 5, it does the same thing. So both of those work. I'm not going to spoil Final Destination 5 for you in this video in case you're watching these movies with me, or like with me. But I think Final Destination 4 does not do a great job. The episode we're talking about today, the movie we're talking about today, does not do a great job at keeping itself in its box while also punching at the box a little bit. So, make a long story short, I think this film could have been much better, but it's not the worst thing I've ever watched. Nick Zano as Hunt Wynorski. Nick is in the Legends of Tomorrow, the CW show, also probably better known, but not by me, for things like What I Like About You as Vance for 54 episodes, which is nothing to bat an eye at. He's also in 90210 and Two Broke Girls, as well as Same as Above, which I've never watched most of those shows, other than, I don't even know if I've watched Legends of Tomorrow, but, you know, heck yeah, a good television career is nothing to bat an eye at. And we're going to move on to the next character. So his name, I believe, is Mykelti Williamson, but he also goes by Michael Williamson, is in this film as one of the better characters and has been in a bunch of things you would probably recognize. As a kid, he was in the Starsky and Hutch show, but since then, he's been in Free Willy, Forrest Gump, Heat, Con Air, Species 2, for the horror connection, Ali, Purge Election Year, Canal Street. He's also on the TV show 24, and he's also in the Fallout show. So he's probably the most character actor here. I recognized him immediately. I've seen him in a bunch of stuff, but he melts into his character so well. A lot of his character is really funny in moments, very serious in moments. Not going to spoil anything about his character until we get to the plot section of this episode, but I love his character a lot. And yeah, so a lot of this film, so like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the characters in this film are written to just irk me for some reason. And that's not the actor's fault. It just sucks because so many of the actors that were in this film, not including Michael Williamson, the last guy I just told you about, but many of the actors and stuff had most of their career stunted after this film came out and kind of bombed at the ratings and stuff, and kind of didn't do much after this at all. People who were going to have some great careers kind of bombed after this film. I don't know if I blame this film necessarily, but it kind of bombed a lot of people's careers, and it's not their fault. Because you can see some of the people I mentioned earlier were about to go into some great things and do some awesome stuff, and then their careers just dived and took a big nosedive towards the end, which really, really, really sucks. But that's not anybody's fault necessarily. It just sucks because a lot of the people are going to have some great careers, and I'm sure they do in whatever they've done since then. Music, even acting, I'm still sure they're trying for acting roles. The first time I saw this film, I think I actually skipped this one and saw Final Destination 5 before I actually watched this one. I think we're talking about this now, so I think the Final Destination being the title confused me, and I thought it was the first film, which I think is kind of funny because it goes to show you how confusing the naming of a franchise can be for a first-time film goer who doesn't have any pre-existing understanding to the rest of the franchise for whatever reason. It's one of those things that really bothers me about these films. This film is, I would have watched it earlier and I might have liked it better if I wasn't so confused by why it was called Final Destination. Maybe that just makes me sound stupid, but I absolutely was so confused by this film the first time I watched it. I liked it though. I don't mind this film. I think some of the kills are fine in this movie. I like a lot of the kills, to be honest, in this film. And that's why I go to these films. The kills. None of the story outside of that is worth watching to me, and I think part of that I got upset because of the way that I was. Final Destination is just a bad name. That's all I'll say. So the plot of the film, very basic plot because I don't want to spoil too much. She'll spoil pretty much everything. So the film starts out like every single other Final Destination film. So there's some predictability to this franchise up to a certain point in the story every time. So the film opens, basically a car race, like a NASCAR type race goes haywire, and there's an accident that kills a bunch of people, and basically everything you can expect from a Final Destination film from that point on happens. People survive, and then the main character has to solve who dies in what order so they can be saved, but they never do. They die at the end. Big, we're done. So the movie's over, which I think pretty much sums up the entire plot of the movie for you. But point out a simple good scene is the scene in the mall where Nick, our main character, has a premonition of a shopping mall movie theater blowing up, and we'll see where that happens. So we're going to talk about some of the kills, and then we'll jolt back to that as the ending kind of wrap up of the film. So some of the kills from the film. Carter Daniels. So some of these characters are characters I didn't mention earlier. Just some of the side characters that are in the film. Carter Daniels is blown apart in a tow truck explosion. Samantha Lane has her right eye perforated by a stone, which feels very similar to the death in Final Destination 2. Or Final Destination 2, where the ladder through the eye. So the next is Andy was launched through a chain link fence. Imagine that in 3D, CGI 3D, and that's what it looks like. Hunter Wynorski is eviscerated by a pole drain. If you've ever seen clips on YouTube, basically he gets his lower half to the edge of a pool drain, which I don't understand why the pool drain was open, but that is death in these movies. Can pull off some crazy stuff. And so his guts go from the inside to the outside, and that's all I'll say. So Jonathan Groves was crushed by a falling bathtub. Pretty simple. A lot of these are just crushings and stuff like that. George Lanter was hit by a speeding ambulance. Janet Cunningham was crushed by a truck tire. Laurie Milligan was internally decapitated between a pillar and a truck. And Nick O'Bannon had his head smashed into a wall and blunt force trauma. Those last three, you'll see. So Nick arrives to the movie theater and the mall after an explosion in a room behind the theater. Nick rushes to reach them while Laurie begins spotting omens warning her that the danger is not over. So then again, it's kind of the premonition. So the premonitions in this film, trying to explain premonitions. So Nick arrives to the premonition of having the movie theater. So then he arrives on the scene of where it happened, that where the premonition happened. But he and Laurie attempt to get Janet, who is one of the sisters, one of the other people, one of their best friends, to leave the theater. They don't. So then Janet is killed by a piece of, like a tire or something. I believe a tire. And then Laurie is squished to death, basically, by the gears having a malfunctioning escalator. This is actually what's kind of crazy about. I like this ending a little bit because of this part. All what you just saw is another premonition inside the premonition. So then Nick realizes that the event hasn't happened yet and is not able to save George, where he dies just as he predicted. He goes to the movie theater. Nick goes to the movie theater because George died. And despite death literally shooting him with nails and nailing him to a board, he is able to save his friends by extinguishing the fire, by triggering the fire sprinklers that would have caused the initial explosion. So that's how they save off the stuff, and I think it's fine. It's not a terrible ending. It's just, but it's not the very, very end. But we'll talk about the very, very end in a second, because I actually don't mind the very, very end of the film. But I think that's fine. I mean, it's 3D, and it's supposed to make you a little bit scared if you're, like, in the movie theater. And I totally understand that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I've always worried about the bad CGI that comes out of this scene. It does not work, and it doesn't translate to a non-3D moment at all. If you're not watching this in 3D, you're not watching it correctly, which sucks. So, you're like, oh, Jared, I thought this film was over. Nope, it's not over yet. 2 weeks later, Nick's wearing a cast on his right arm. There's a loose pilot outside of their place where they're hanging out, and they warned the workers about it before meeting Laurie and Janet inside the cafe kind of thing that they're going in, the restaurant place where you see this restaurant throughout the film multiple times. It's kind of where they talk about a lot about, like, oh, how is death, what's the order? A lot of that happens in this restaurant. So then a few minutes later, the mall disaster was not really supposed to happen. It was supposed to lead them to where they needed to be for death to kill them. And then at that very, very second, the pylon collapses that he mentions earlier, causing a truck to swerve and crash into the restaurant. So then it runs over and kills Nick, Laurie, and Janet in the very, very end. So as the final scene is an X-ray, basically everybody gets, like, hurt in some way. Somebody will be crushed, somebody will be blown up, somebody gets hurt, basically, and then teeth fly at the camera, and that is when the movie ends. I like the X-ray at the end. I understand why they had to probably do the X-ray version and couldn't just, like, make it happen. If that wasn't an X-ray version and that was just real, I think that would have been the greatest ending to a Final Destination film. I like the ending of this film. I don't think I like the film, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I like this film, and its moments of it are entertaining. The kills in this, so like, look at me, hear me. Don't look at me. If you're looking at me right now, that's kind of scary. So hear me instead. Look at me. That's really funny. This is not a video podcast, so you can't look at me. You can just hear me. So hear me when I say this. I also watch movies like this just for the kills. If you watch these movies just for the kills and you can ignore the plot that revolves around it and you can just kind of ignore it and then wait for the next death to happen, this movie works for that. all the kills in this movie are worth watching. It's in 3D. Get yourself a pair of blue and red glasses and make this movie a 3D movie. I don't know if it's 3D. I don't know if there is a Blu-ray or a DVD version of the film that's in 3D. But if there is, do it. Watch it. It's fine. It's not... The deaths in this movie are worth watching. In fact, I think it's some of the best deaths in the franchise come specifically through the elevator scene scares the crap out of me, the premonition, which is why I almost wish that it wasn't a premonition. I wish it was real, because it's very, very scary. I think a lot of this film works. I think a lot of the deaths work. Specifically, I don't think the plot of the film works. I think the deaths work. So let me give you this rating, and then I'll continue blabbering on. So if you don't know how I do it here, this is your first episode, you're like, I want to watch Final Destination 4. Is it good? Is it bad? What will I think about it? So this is how I do all my ratings. So I do my ratings out of 7. 1 through 3 means it's not great. 4 means it's straight down the middle. Watch it. You'll probably enjoy it. And 4, 5, 6, and 7 means I recommend it 100%. Watch it. So 1 through 3 means 1 is like, don't watch this movie. I absolutely despise it. 3 is like, it's fine. It's mid on the bad side. 4 is like good, straight down the middle. 5 is good, middle, good middle. 3 is bad middle. 4 is middle. 2 is 1 bad. 6, 7 great, right? So that's kind of the explanation of that. So with that in mind, I would put this at a very solid 3. There's no... The originality in this plot is just not there for me. The actual kills in this movie are the best thing about this movie. If that's what you're looking for, this film works 100% of the way, exactly the way it's supposed to. So you can't blame the movie's audience, the movie for playing to that audience, because that's what people expect from these movies, especially at this point in the franchise. They don't expect almost anything else. And I can't blame them for that. But I give this movie a very solid 3, which I believe is the lowest I've rated a Final Destination film so far. Most of the Final Destination films up to this point are at least a 4, if not a 5. Final Destinations 1, 2 are 5s. I don't know if I gave 3 a 5 or not, but I would give this one a 3 just because of the lack of originality in the plot and no characters that I can kind of grab onto and levitate towards, just because I find a lot of the characters in this film to be very, very, very not fun. There's no one fun in this movie. I don't find a single character in this movie to be fun, other than the guy who gets Michael Williamson's character, George something, who gets run over by an ambulance before the ending of the movie even happens. He's got some sad moments in this movie, but I'm pretty sure he tries to commit, and like the gun jams, or like nothing works, and then he gets hit by an ambulance. I don't know, crazy, sad, but I like his character the best out of every character in this film. I think that if this movie had more characters that I could deeply care for, I think I would probably like this movie better. But there isn't a character like Devon Sawa or Clear Rivers who makes this film work out the way it's supposed to and gives an emotional hold to the characters in the film. There's no one like that. You can have bad characters, like there's bad characters in Final Destination 3, right? But there are characters that you care about that are contrasting to those characters that you see in Final Destination 4, like 3. Final Destination 4 doesn't have the contrasting good and bad characters to make that kind of story interesting. They're just bad characters. So that's just how I feel about that. I don't know. I think there's a lot that you could do, but never do. And they never really get out of their own box up until the next film. I think this next film, the remake, if you'd like to call it that, if you don't know anything about Final Destination 5, I won't tell you anything about that. It's not a remake. I said that wrong. I don't want to tell you what happens in it if you haven't seen it yet. Again, if you're watching it through, if you're interested in watching these movies with me along as I go through them, please watch Final Destination 5 before you watch the film. Don't look it up at all and just go through it. So that is basically the end of our episode here today. I hope you've enjoyed. I'm going to be trying to make these happen at least once a month. My goal is to get it slowly down to once a week, if I can get that to happen. At least you'll have an episode once a month. I can hopefully get them down to once a week because I like podcasting a lot. It's one of my favorite things that I get to do because I have a reason to ramble and talk and have fun talking. So if this is something you guys enjoyed, please let me know. It's Media by Podcast Network at gmail.com. Send some emails there telling me about your favorite films, all that stuff, and we'll do some segments here at the end reading some listener emails. So send an email to mediabythepodcastnetwork at gmail.com. I'm sure that email will probably change. I'll probably make an email just for listener emails, which if that happens, I will let you know. But for now, mediabythepodcastnetwork at gmail.com. So appreciate that. Appreciate all of you who listen, watch, all that stuff, because really just deeply appreciate it. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I've always wanted to be an entertainer. And the fact that any one of you has ever spent time with me means the absolute world, and I could not appreciate it enough. So with that, all the Media by Podcasts, all of them, Diary of an Indie Filmmakers, just filmmaking stuff, Diary of an Indie Filmmakers, all that, that's all it is. Exploring Cinema is just all movies that aren't horror movies. So if you like horror movies, this movie is not one of them. This movie is a horror movie, but Exploring Cinema just holds all movies that are not horror movies there. So with that in mind, I want to say thank you all once again for listening, and I've said this for 7 years now at this point, and I'll say it again, and I'll probably say it at least once a month, hopefully once a week, until I'm no longer making podcasts. So with that, treat every day like it's Halloween.
Mediabyte Podcast Network.